Sometimes the smallest choices lead us down the most unexpected roads. A struggling father, barely holding it together for his son, crosses paths with a little girl crying alone on a curb. He has nothing left to give, but offers kindness anyway. He doesn't know who she is. He doesn't ask. He just helps. What happens next will challenge assumptions, cross social divides, and remind us that humanity has no price tag. Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't just change someone else's life. It just might save your own. And for Derrick Brown, this ordinary morning was about to turn into the most extraordinary day of his life. On a crisp fall morning in Newark, Derrick Brown stood outside a corner grocery store, his breath forming faint clouds in the air. He clutched a plastic bag with a loaf of bread and a small carton of milk, just enough to get his son through the next few days. Every dollar had been counted, every item weighed with care. As he turned toward his battered pickup truck, something in the corner of his eye made him stop. There, sitting alone on the concrete curb near the entrance, was a little girl. Blonde hair and tangled pigtails, pink coat too clean for this side of town. Her small shoulders trembled with each hiccuping sob, her red-rimmed eyes scanning the parking lot with silent desperation. Derrick hesitated, instincts wrestling with reality. He knew how this might look, a big, black man approaching a crying white girl in public. One wrong move, and everything could spiral. He took a breath. People like him didn't get the benefit of the doubt, but that didn't mean he had to walk away. The girl looked up at him then, eyes wide and filled with fear and hope all at once. In that moment, something shifted in him. Whatever the consequences, he couldn't leave her there. Little did he know the moment he reached out to help her would collide with the weight of his own struggles, waiting for him just around the corner. The apartment smelled faintly of motor oil and mildew, a mix that clung to the peeling walls and threadbare carpet like a memory that refused to fade. Derrick Brown sat hunched at the edge of his worn-out couch, elbows on knees, head in hands, as morning light slipped weakly through crooked blinds. His living space was quiet, too quiet, except for the ticking of the cheap plastic clock on the wall and the occasional groan of pipes behind the walls. 3 years ago, Derrick had been a full-time mechanic at Ron's Auto on Ferry Street. The garage was gritty and loud, but it had been his place, where he found pride in honest work and enough pay to keep a roof over his son's head. Then the pandemic hit. Ron closed up shop, and Derrick's steady life unraveled like a frayed belt under a worn engine. Now he took whatever jobs he could get, moving furniture for strangers, cleaning out garages, patching old AC units in the dead heat, most of it paid cash under the table, all of it unreliable. His refrigerator moaned when opened, as if even it was tired of pretending. Inside, a half-empty milk carton, a cracked Tupperware with leftover rice and a jar of peanut butter scraping bottom. Bills lay stacked on the counter beside a final notice from the landlord, red letters like flashing sirens. 2 months behind on rent. One more missed payment, and he and Caleb would be out on the street. He'd tried reaching out to every contact he had, but work was dry, and his phone barely held a charge, let alone hope. The apartment was crumbling around him, the ceiling paint peeling like dead skin, the single overhead light flickering with every gust of wind outside. But the hardest part wasn't the noise, the bills, or the hunger. It was looking at his son and pretending everything would be okay. He rubbed his eyes, stood, and crossed to the kitchenette. The day had just begun, and he needed to be strong, for Caleb, if not for himself. And in the stillness of that dim apartment, a quiet determination rose in him, unaware that today would test it in the most unexpected way. Derrick smeared the last bit of peanut butter across a single slice of bread, spreading it so thin it barely left a gloss. He placed it on a chipped plate and called out softly, "Caleb, breakfast, buddy." His voice carried warmth, though his heart felt weighed down. A moment later, the soft padding of feet approached. Caleb emerged, 8 years old and still small for his age, wrapped in an oversized sweatshirt that used to be Derrick's. His tight curls were tousled from sleep, and his eyes, deep brown and wide, held that quiet spark only children seem to have when the world hadn't worn them down yet. He climbed into the wobbly kitchen chair, legs swinging under the table. He didn't ask why breakfast was just one slice of toast. He never did. "Thanks, Dad," he said before taking small, careful bites. Derrick sat across from him, watching with a silent ache. "You got something fun going on at school today?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. Caleb perked up, crumbs at the corners of his mouth. "Miss Anderson said we get to draw whatever we want in art. I'm going to make a big house with a swing and a giant dog, one of those fluffy ones like in movies." Derrick smiled and looked down at his calloused hands. He wanted so badly to promise Caleb that one day they'd have that house, that backyard, that dog, but he couldn't lie. Not to him. "Sounds like a masterpiece in the making," he said, reaching over to tousle Caleb's curls. Caleb looked up suddenly, a little more serious. "Dad, do you think things will get better?" Derrick paused, then forced a smile. "Yeah, buddy, I really do." Caleb nodded, trusting, believing. And that faith, so pure and steady, was what Derrick clung to as he prepared for another day that didn't promise much, except the chance to keep fighting for his boy. The city breathed a little slower in the early morning, and Derrick welcomed the quiet. He zipped up Caleb's jacket a little higher, tugged his own coat tighter against the chill, and took his son's small hand into his calloused one. They walked together down cracked sidewalks lined with worn-out storefronts and chain-link fences, stepping around puddles and loose trash like it was part of the daily ritual. Caleb chattered beside him, full of energy. "And the dog's name is going to be Rocket. He's big but super fast, and he can bark so loud it scares the bad guys away." Derrick chuckled softly, nodding along, though his thoughts were tangled in worry. Rent was due in 2 days. His truck was making a noise that didn't sound good, and his phone had buzzed that morning with a new final notice from the power company. Still, he listened, really listened, because Caleb deserved a father who cared, even when the world was burning at the edges. When they reached the school entrance, Derrick crouched down to Caleb's level, gently fixing the straps on his faded backpack. "Have a good day, champ," he said, keeping his tone light. Caleb grinned wide. "You too, Dad." Derrick stood and watched him disappear into the crowd of kids until the bright yellow door closed behind him. For a moment, warmth settled over him like sunlight cutting through cloud. Then, reality tugged him back. He turned and began the walk to the grocery store, still counting every cent in his pocket and every ounce of strength he had left. The fluorescent lights inside the corner store buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over narrow aisles lined with dented cans and dusty cereal boxes. Derrick moved through the store with quiet precision, his boots barely making a sound against the scuffed linoleum. He didn't need a list, he'd memorized the prices. A loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, a new jar of peanut butter if he could swing it. He paused at the shelf, comparing brands not by flavor, but by the numbers on the sticker. Every cent mattered now. At the register, he laid the items out gently and pulled out his thin wallet. The bills inside were wrinkled, worn, and few. The cashier, a young man with earbuds in, didn't say a word as Derrick handed over his last crumpled 10. The change dropped into his hand with a soft clink, and he nodded once in thanks. Outside, the sun had risen a bit higher, reflecting off windshields and storefronts with a sharp glare. Derrick adjusted the bag in his hand and started toward his truck, but just as he reached the edge of the lot, he noticed something. Someone, sitting near the curb. A small figure curled up and shaking. He slowed, squinting, and that's when he saw her. A little girl, alone, crying. She looked no older than 6. Her small frame was curled into itself like she was trying to disappear, her pink coat bright against the gray sidewalk. Blonde curls hung limply at her cheeks, and her face, streaked with dirt and tears, was turned down, hands clenched in her lap. Derrick's first instinct was to keep walking. This wasn't his business. Someone would come. A parent, maybe a store manager. But the longer he stood there, the more he realized. No one was coming. The parking lot was nearly empty. The girl was very much alone. He clenched his jaw. Approaching her would raise eyebrows. He'd been judged before for less. He'd felt the tight stares, the held purses, the suspicion that seemed to follow him into every space he entered. But then he thought of Caleb. What if his boy were sitting here, lost and scared? A curse slipped under his breath as he changed direction and approached slowly, his steps measured and quiet. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently, crouching a few feet away, hands visible, voice calm. "You okay?" The girl flinched, shrinking back. Her eyes, wide and fearful, darted up at him, then back to the ground. Her small fingers gripped her coat tight at the sleeves, and her bottom lip trembled. Derrick knew that look. It wasn't just fear of being lost. It was fear of him, and that hit deeper than he expected. It was a look he'd seen in adults 100 times, but in a child, it stung differently. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his tone low and steady. "I promise. You just look like you could use some help." The girl sniffled. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I can't find my mommy." Relief and heartbreak crashed into Derrick at once. He nodded slowly. "Okay, we'll figure it out." He motioned to a nearby bench. "Want to sit down for a second?" She hesitated, then gave the faintest nod and followed him over, sitting at the far end with her hands still clenched in her coat. Derrick gave her space, but inside, he was already preparing for what came next. And in his gut, he knew this wasn't going to be as simple as just making a phone call. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them fragile. Derrick let her be the one to break it. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emily," she whispered, still not looking at him. He nodded slowly. "That's a pretty name." She gave no reaction, but her breathing had steadied a little and she seemed less like she was about to bolt. "Do you know your mom's phone number?" he asked. Emily reached into her small backpack, fumbling for a moment before pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. She handed it to him cautiously, eyes flicking up for just a second. Derrick unfolded the paper carefully. A phone number was scribbled in messy handwriting along with an address. His eyebrows rose. It wasn't far, just a 10-minute drive. He pulled out his beat-up phone and dialed. The call rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. He frowned, then tried again. Still nothing. Emily was twisting her hands in her lap now, her lower lip trembling again. "Hey," he said softly. "It's okay. We'll get you home." She looked at him then, just a flicker of trust in her eyes. He glanced again at the address. 10 minutes. He could take her. It wasn't the safest option, not for either of them, but the thought of her waiting hours at some cold police station didn't sit right with him either. He exhaled slowly, his decision already made, even before the words left his mouth. "Okay, Emily," he said gently. "How about we go find your mom together?" Emily didn't respond right away. Her small fingers gripped the hem of her coat and her eyes darted toward the parking lot like she was trying to figure out if this was safe. If he was safe. Derrick didn't blame her. He was a stranger. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a worn-out jacket with tired eyes and cracked hands. The kind of man little girls are told not to trust. And yet, here they were. He crouched again, keeping a soft distance between them, his voice low and honest. "I get it. You don't know me, and you don't have to come with me if you're not comfortable. We can wait here. I can call someone else, a police officer, if that makes you feel better." Emily bit her lip, clearly torn. "Or," he added, "if you want, you can sit in my truck while I drive. I won't even start it until you're buckled in. Your choice. No pressure." She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "Okay," she whispered. Derrick nodded, standing slowly. "All right, let's get you home." He led her across the parking lot, making sure to keep his steps calm and his body language open. When they reached the truck, he opened the door and waited while she climbed in and strapped herself in with cautious hands. Only after she was settled did he close the door and start the engine. the truck groaning softly as it came to life. He pulled out of the lot slowly, his eyes checking on her through the rear-view mirror. And as they turned onto the main road, Emily spoke, barely louder than a whisper. "You didn't leave me." The words hit harder than he expected, settling in his chest like a quiet, undeniable truth. The old pickup rumbled along uneven streets, the engine humming like it had just enough life left to make this one more trip. Inside, silence hung thick, broken only by the occasional creak of the suspension and Emily's quiet sniffles. Derrick kept his eyes on the road, hands firm on the wheel. His mind spun with a dozen questions. Where was her mom? Why hadn't she answered the phone? What exactly was he walking into? From the corner of his eye, he saw Emily fidget in her seat, clutching the straps of her backpack like they were a lifeline. "Is my mommy going to be mad?" she asked, voice small and uncertain. Derrick glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I don't think so, sweetheart. She's probably scared out of her mind, just like you." Emily looked down at her lap. "I didn't mean to get lost. I thought I was following her." Derrick softened his voice. "Hey, it happens. You didn't do anything wrong." They passed from the grit of his neighborhood into streets that looked more polished, tree-lined blocks with neat sidewalks and rows of houses that looked pulled from magazines. It felt like crossing into another world. Derrick swallowed hard as they turned onto the address from the paper. This was it, the place. 2 stories, white shutters, stone walkway. So different from the place he and Caleb called home. He slowed in front of the house, parking along the curb. Then the front door flew open. And what happened next, he hadn't been prepared for. The front door swung open with a bang, and a woman bolted down the steps like a storm. Her long black coat billowed behind her, hair falling loose across her shoulders. Her face, drawn, panicked, desperate, scanned the street until her eyes locked on the truck. "Emily!" she screamed, voice cracking. In the back seat, Emily fumbled with the buckle, her small fingers trembling too much to unclip it. Derrick reached over to help, his movements careful and slow. As soon as the latch clicked, she threw the door open and ran. The woman dropped to her knees on the lawn, arms open wide, catching Emily mid-sprint. "Oh my God!" she gasped, hugging the child so tightly it looked like she might never let go. Baby, I'm here. I'm here." "I couldn't find you," Emily cried into her coat. "I thought you left me." "No, never. I'm so sorry. I thought you were right behind me, at the store. I didn't see—" Her voice cracked under the weight of guilt. Derrick stood by the truck, unsure if he should leave or stay. He watched them, a silent observer, until the woman finally looked up and saw him. Her expression shifted in an instant, from relief to something tighter, calculating, wary. She rose to her feet, one hand still clutching Emily close. Her eyes studied him like a security camera, scanning, analyzing, deciding whether he was a threat or a savior. Derrick knew that look. He'd seen it too many times. That pause where someone tried to figure out what kind of man they were dealing with, just based on his face, his clothes, his skin. "I found her near a grocery store," he said evenly, holding out the wrinkled paper with her number and address. "She had this. I tried calling." She hesitated, then stepped forward to take the paper, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said at last, her voice quieter now. But the uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. And Derrick felt it, the invisible line drawn between them, even as he stood there having done the right thing. For a moment, no one spoke. Emily clung to her mother, and her mother held her with a kind of desperation that made Derrick look away. It was a moment meant to be private, but he'd been pulled into it. The woman, Claire, exhaled sharply and rubbed her hand over her forehead. "I didn't even realize she wasn't in the car until I got home," she said, her voice shaky. "I thought she was behind me. I must have lost her while loading the bags." She looked back at Derrick, her features softening just slightly. "It happens," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to comfort her. Maybe because he knew what it was like to feel like you'd failed your child. Claire blinked rapidly, holding Emily tighter. Thank you, she said again, slower this time. Really, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there. Derrick gave a slight nod. It's no problem. He started to turn back toward his truck, the interaction already feeling too long, too exposed. But just as he reached for the door handle, a small voice called out behind him. Mr. Derrick. He paused, turned. Emily was looking at him, her fingers curled around the edge of her coat, and what she said next made him freeze for a breath longer than he expected. Thank you. For not leaving me. Derrick crouched to meet Emily's eyes. She was standing just a few feet away, her chin trembling slightly, her voice so soft it almost got carried away by the breeze. You're welcome, kid, he said, and his voice cracked more than he expected. Emily hesitated, then took a sudden step forward, and before he could react, she threw her arms around his neck. It wasn't long, barely more than a few seconds, but the hug was fierce, genuine, the kind that said more than words ever could. Derrick froze. His hands hovered for a moment, unsure, before resting gently on her back. Then, just as quickly, she pulled away and ran back to her mother's side. Claire watched, her expression unreadable now. Maybe there was something shifting behind her guarded look, maybe not, but after a beat, she straightened and stepped forward. What's your name? She asked, her voice more composed this time. Derrick Brown. She nodded slowly, like committing it to memory. I'm Claire Bennett. There was a pause, long enough to feel the weight of everything unsaid. If there's anything I can do to repay— You don't owe me anything, Derrick cut in, his voice quiet but firm. Just take care of her. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but then simply nodded. Derrick turned back to his truck. But as he walked away, he could feel her eyes still on him, and it stayed with him longer than he expected. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the Newark skyline, casting golden streaks of light through the narrow alleyways as Derrick pulled into the crumbling lot outside his apartment building. The truck groaned as it came to a stop, like even it was tired of pushing through. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, exhaling. He was running on fumes, physically, emotionally, financially. The grocery bag sat beside him, still carrying the basics for dinner. His plan was simple. Make it through the evening, make it through tomorrow, and somehow, maybe, scrape together enough to keep a roof over Caleb's head for another week. But as he stepped out of the truck and shut the door behind him, a sleek black car rolled into the lot. Its polished body gleamed like an alien artifact amidst the dented sedans and beat-up pickups that lined the street. Derrick didn't pay it much attention until the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, tall, confident, wearing a navy blue suit that looked like it had never touched a wrinkle. His shoes alone probably cost more than Derrick's entire wardrobe. The man looked directly at him, eyes sharp but calm. Mr. Brown, the man called. Derrick stopped mid-step, tightening his grip on the grocery bag. Who's asking? The man extended a hand. Gregory Bennett. My wife told me what you did for our daughter. Derrick didn't move to shake it. He just looked at the man, the name clicking into place. He didn't know why this guy was here, but whatever it was, Derrick had a feeling it wasn't something he was ready for. Gregory let his hand drop, unfazed. I wanted to thank you. In person. But Derrick had learned that when rich men showed up unannounced, there was always more than just thanks involved. Derrick kept a careful distance, his posture firm. Your wife already thanked me, he said flatly. I'm not looking for anything else. Gregory offered a calm smile, the kind that came from years of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. I figured you'd say that, but I came here for more than just words. Derrick exhaled through his nose, already tired of whatever this conversation was turning into. He didn't have time for guilt money or empty gratitude wrapped in politeness. I don't need a reward, he said. I did what anyone would have done. Gregory's eyes sharpened, but he didn't lose his composure. Except most people don't do what you did. There was a pause. Then Gregory gestured toward his luxury car. I own a company, Bennett Developments. We do large-scale construction and real estate across New Jersey. We're always looking for good people. People with integrity, with grit. Derrick squinted, uncertain. You offering me a job? Gregory nodded once. I am. Derrick blinked. He had expected a check, maybe a thank you basket or some overly sentimental card, but this threw him off balance. You don't even know me, he said cautiously. I know enough, Gregory replied. I know you helped a child when it wasn't convenient. You didn't ask for anything. You just did the right thing. That tells me everything I need to know. Derrick crossed his arms, heart thudding. He wanted to question it, to poke holes in the offer, but deep down, he knew one truth more powerful than pride. He needed the work. And sometimes, life didn't hand you miracles. It handed you chances. Just once. And you had to decide if you'd take it. Derrick sat at the tiny kitchen table, the lights dimmed low, casting long shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. The business card lay in front of him like something foreign, clean, sharp-edged, professional. The name Gregory Bennett was embossed in silver ink. It looked like it belonged in another world. He flipped it over again, running his thumb along the raised letters. He'd told himself he'd call the moment he got inside. But hours had passed, and the phone sat untouched on the table, screen dark. Caleb had fallen asleep in their shared bedroom, soft breaths rising and falling like the only rhythm Derrick could trust. He stared at the card. He had nothing to lose, but something in him, something tired and scarred, hesitated. Men like him didn't get offers like this, not without strings, not without paying for it in some way. And yet, the man had looked him in the eye, hadn't flinched, hadn't condescended, just offered a chance. Derrick reached for the phone, hands steady now. He dialed. It rang twice. Gregory Bennett, came the voice, smooth and alert even at this late hour. It's Derrick Brown. There was the slightest pause. I was hoping you'd call, Gregory said. Be at the site by 7. The foreman, Carl, will show you around. Derrick didn't say much else, didn't need to. When he hung up, the silence felt different. Not empty, but open. Like maybe, for the first time in a long time, something was about to shift. The morning air was crisp as Derrick pulled into the construction site just before 7. His truck rattled like it might fall apart if he dared push it another mile, but it got him there. That was enough. The site buzzed with activity. Cranes groaned, men shouted over engines, and the metallic clang of steel on steel echoed like a heartbeat. It was chaos, but organized. Alive. He spotted a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard barking orders near a stack of lumber. The man turned, eyes narrowing as Derrick approached. You Brown? Yeah, Derrick, he replied. Carl, the man grunted, jerking his chin toward a pile of gear. Boots and gloves are there. Grab 'em. We start fast here. You don't keep up, you don't stay. No handshake, no welcome, just steel in his tone and skepticism in his eyes. Derrick said nothing. He didn't need kindness. He needed a shot. And so, he worked. The first hours were brutal. Heavy lifting, hauling beams, nailing, measuring, tasks that left his muscles screaming and shirt soaked through. The sun had barely risen, and already his back ached like it hadn't in years. But he kept going. Quiet. Focused. He didn't complain, didn't question. By noon, his hands were blistered beneath the gloves and sweat clung to his skin like armor. As he paused to catch his breath near a stack of pallets, Carl walked over and tossed him a bottle of water. No words, just a nod. Derrick caught it, drank slowly, and nodded back. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't dismissal either. And, for now, that was more than enough. As the day wore on, the rhythm of the job began to settle into him, like muscle memory rediscovered. The noise didn't overwhelm him, it grounded him, and somewhere between the hammer swings and gravel underfoot, he began to feel something he hadn't in a long time. Like maybe, just maybe, he belonged here. By the third week, Derrick was arriving before the sun even touched the sky and staying long after it dipped behind the skeletal beams of rising buildings. He was the first to grab a shovel, the last to drop it. He asked questions when he didn't know something, learned fast, kept his head down, but his presence spoke louder than words. The crew had noticed. So had a Carl, but Derrick didn't expect what came next. It was Friday afternoon when a familiar voice cut through the clang of tools and buzz of machinery. "Brown," Gregory called from across the lot, now in work boots and a rolled-up shirt, far from the polished suit he'd worn the week before. Derrick wiped sweat from his brow and approached. "Walk with me," Gregory said, already moving toward the far end of the site. They stopped near a stack of steel beams. Gregory looked out at the developing frame of the building, then turned to Derrick with something close to a smile. "You're doing good work." Derrick shrugged. "Just doing the job." Gregory studied him. "That's exactly why I'm offering you something more." Derrick's brow furrowed. "There's a management training program," Gregory continued, "for guys who show leadership. Guys like you." The words landed heavier than Derrick expected. He hadn't thought past this week, past the next paycheck. His world had been about survival, nothing more. But this sounded like a future. He looked away, jaw tight. "Why me?" Gregory didn't hesitate. "Because you've got potential. And because men like us, we don't always get doors opened for us. So when one does, you don't stand outside wondering. You walk through." Derrick held his gaze. A long silence passed. Then he nodded once, slow but sure. "I'm in." And for the first time in years, those two words felt like a beginning, not a compromise. The sun was dipping low by the time Derrick pulled into the parking lot, his muscles aching but his spirit strangely light. The day had been long, his body sore in places he didn't know could ache, but there was something different in the way he held the steering wheel now. Something solid, something like pride. He stepped into the apartment, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting him. The smell of toast lingered in the air. Caleb sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered crayons, eyes lighting up when he saw his dad walk in. "Hey, Dad, guess what?" Derrick set down his lunchbox, kneeling beside him. "What's up, bud?" "I finished my drawing," Caleb beamed, holding up a sheet of paper. On it was a big house with a backyard, a swing set, and right in the center, a giant dog with floppy ears and a wagging tail. Derrick stared at it, throat tightening. The same dream Caleb had described that morning in the kitchen. "It's perfect," he said softly. Caleb studied him. "You look happy." Derrick reached out and ruffled his son's hair, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah," he said, the word settling deep in his chest. "I think I am." For the first time in years, he wasn't just treading water, hoping not to drown. He was moving forward, one small step at a time. And as he looked down at Caleb's drawing, he didn't just see a child's dream. He saw a blueprint, a life he just might be able to build. Life has a quiet way of testing us, often when we least expect it, and with no reward in sight. Derrick Brown had every reason to walk away that day. He was tired, broke, and carrying the weight of a life slipping through his fingers. But he didn't walk away. He saw a child in need, and he chose compassion over fear, action over silence. In a world where people are often judged by their appearance or circumstances, Derrick's story reminds us that kindness needs no permission, that the measure of a man is not in his wallet, but in his heart. And sometimes the universe sees that. Sometimes someone is watching, and sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing opens a door you never saw coming. So, the next time you're standing at a quiet crossroads, ask yourself, will you walk away, or will you step forward? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more real stories that remind us of the good still left in the world.